Some viewers may find the following video disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
Welcome everyone. Today we're going to be talking about the Rite Part 2. This is the story of Annalise Michel. Around 1973, Annalise had basically hit a breaking point with everything in the psychiatric hospital. The doctors had been prescribing her medicine for her temporal lobe epilepsy, and that was not alleviating any of her problems. And it is around this time that she started seeing faces on the faces of everyone in the psychiatric hospital and churches and so on, and she would claim that they would have demonic faces. She would also often hear voices telling her that she was going to rot in hell. And the doctors at the psychiatric hospital would try to prescribe her medicine that was mostly used for schizophrenics. And this too had no effect on Annalise. And she was becoming more growingly frustrated and depressed. And it is around this time that her family and a close family friend would try to take her on a trip to San Diego. While on this trip with San Diego, this is where she would first encounter Father Ernst Alt, and he would also recognize the differences in Annalise's mental state. Now, while Annalise was in San Diego, not only had Alt, but the family friend had noticed that she began acting very differently, and part of this was in the letter that Alt would write to the church. In this letter, he would write and state that Annalise was acting very strange and was completely avoiding the church at all costs, and going as far to not even wanting to walk past any of the crucifixes they had within the cross. Alt would later testify in this letter and say that during a time when people were gathered around the garden to pray, that Annalise would stay in the far, far back, staying as far as she could. And when she was questioned on why, she would say that anytime she got anybody near praying, she would just hear this sound of gnashing of teeth, and it just got to the point that it was really disturbing her. Her family friend would even go and claim that around this time, she would refuse to drink from a Christian spring. And Alt would also say that she would not even look at any of the portraits that were in the church. Alt would go into detail and say that if there was any pictures of the saints or even portraits of the Christ, she would just turn her head away. And when was asked why, she would just say that their faces were shining so brightly that it was hurting her eyes. After Alt would write the letter to the church, he would not be the only one to write the letter, because after this incident, Annalise's parents would also write a letter to the church and request an exorcism. But even though Father Alt and both parents had requested these things, the church would deny their request and would more or less suggest that the parents just do the continuation of medical treatment. But it is around this time that the Michels would say that Annalise's mental state would take a complete nosedive. It is said around this time that Annalise's mental state had, like I said, taken a nosedive. And she had become more aggressive and violent towards her family, more than her parents and her siblings, more than anything else. It is also said that she started doing very strange things that could not be explained. On one night, she would crawl on all her hands and knees and crawl underneath the table and begin barking like a dog all through the night. It is also said that around this time that Annalise began crawling on the floor and gathering up spiders that would be on the floor and eating them. And she would also drink her own urine. And it also said that she would also scurry over to the fireplace and grab the coals and try to eat them. And so the parents would again request Alt to investigate their daughter to see if she classified for an exorcism. Father Alt would go to the Michel's house and he would witness Annalise's interaction and her behavior. And it is around this time that Annalise also started telling not only her parents, but Alt as well, that she was possessed by 5 spirits. and would each tell them that she was possessed by the demons' names Cain, Lucifer, Nero, Judas Iscariot, and Adolf Hitler. Alt would eventually write a letter to Bishop Joseph Stengel, and in his letter, Alt would tell Joseph that he did not notice Annalise having any kind of convulsions or seizures for that matter, and the entire time he was there had not been there. Alt would later go and say that he was completely convinced that Michelle was actually suffering from demonic possession, and Joseph would actually grant the exorcism in 1975. At this point, Joseph would then grant Father Arnold Renz permission to perform an exorcism on Annalise Michelle, but he would also order that it would be done in complete secrecy. He had also told Renz that she followed the protocols of the Romanium, or the mandate that I had told you about in our earlier videos. Renz would begin the exorcism on September 24th, 1975, and they would have about 1 to 2 exorcism sessions a week, and each session would last up to about 4 hours. And around the time that Renz and Alt were performing the exorcisms, Annalise would completely refuse any kind of medical treatment from doctors, and would also tell her parents that she did not want to have any medical treatment done. It is also said in a later interview that Annalise would also confide in Father Alt that she wanted to die for the wayward ways of the youth and for the apostate priests of the time. And she had also made statements that she was nothing but vanity, and made other claims of wanting to sacrifice herself and die for people. Within 10 months of the exorcisms, they would have a total of 67 exorcisms on Annalise Michelle. And it is said around the time of 1976 that Annalise began quitting eating completely, and she was constantly in a near starvation state. Unfortunately, Annalise Michelle would not survive these exorcisms, and she would ultimately pass on July 1st, 1976. In our earlier video, I talked about the exorcism of Emily Rose, and I talked about how a lot of the things that happened in the film were pretty spot on about the actual accounts that happened during the exorcism of Annalise Michelle. There's one scene in particular that's truly terrifying that probably has more weight and is probably more accurate about what happened during one of the sessions nearing the end of her life.
Tell me your name.
He who commands you with the orders you thrown down from the highest heaven into the depths of hell. In the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, I now command you. Tell me your name. Sit here, therefore, and fear Satan, enemy of the faith. Give me your name, demon. Ancient serpents, depart from this servant of God. Tell me your 6 names. We are the ones who dwell within.
Around the time of Annalise's death on July 1st, 1976, they would do an autopsy report on her body, and in the report, they would find that she had been in a near starvation state for almost a full year. And not only would they find that, they would also notice that she had broken both of her knees for prolonged periods of time of being on her knees, and had also gotten pneumonia around the time of her death. It is around this time that the prosecution would also say that she could have been saved up to as far as a week before her death, and would then, at this point, charge not only the priest, but the Michelles for negligence homicide.